Good morning. So I am thrilled this morning. Chris, you're joining us to answer some questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
So just by way of quick introduction for everybody listening. So we're joined this morning by Chris Taggart, currently the Director of Marketing at Smart Energy, which is the national campaign to drive consumer business and demand for digital smart energy meters. And don't worry, in a second, Chris is going to explain a bit more about that. But prior to moving to smart energy, you had a career in advertising. So you worked for arguably one of the best in the UK, AMV, BBDO, and worked for big clients, BT, Asda, Currys, and a host of other huge household names. So I've got some questions that we're going to go through, but before we go into those, would you be so kind? Could you tell us a bit about Smart Energy, who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Suzie. And yeah, lovely to chat. And yes, Smart Energy is not itself a consumer brand, but what we do, which is encouraging on behalf of the energy industry. We're funded by the energy industry, but licensed by government. So we're a bit like the COI doesn't exist anymore, but there's a bit of that in it, I suppose. And our current mandate is to the government roll out smart meters and encouraging everybody to get one in terms of all the national benefits to improving the energy infrastructure of the country, and some personal benefits in terms of being more aware of your energy, using energy better, and saving your energy. And yeah, and most people will know it from the consumer objects that are most visible. We have brought Albert Einstein back from the dead in a series of marketing communications that many people should hopefully have seen by now, because it's been going for a couple of years.
Yeah, they're fabulous. You've done an absolutely great job of that. Well done to you and the team for the delivery of that. It looks really, really smart. So let's talk about a bit about you, Chris, and your background. So you've got a real breadth of marketing experience, as I mentioned in the intro, years working for kind of leading ad agencies, and brilliant on the creative, really strong on the brand. What led you to this career in marketing?
Yeah, well, I think the things that I went into marketing for, they're probably still the things that I have stayed for, and I do think marketing is this amazing blended mix of, if you had a Venn diagram of the different bits, there's business, of course, that's the thrill of building businesses and generating sales. I think you've got to be really interested in people and insights around customers, because that's an awful lot of the work is about thinking, how do I serve an audience? So I think you've got to fundamentally be interested in that. I worked for a year in a call center, Suzie. I don't know if you know this, just before I went to uni. So I'll tell you what, there's nothing like a year in a call center to decide whether or not you find customers' problems with brands and what they want interesting. And there's also a bit of there's creativity, of course, in marketing, and in the widest possible sense of that, there is creative. And as you say, I've worked in a creative agency before for many years, but there's wider applications of creativity across everything. And then increasingly, of course, perhaps not quite so much when I started, Suzie, but the technology, which has disrupted everything and changed everything. And not unique to marketing, of course, and perhaps sometimes we overstate that. There's nothing. Recruitment has been transformed by technology, hasn't it, in the last 20 years? But yeah, so I think that would be that was the sell to me of business meets creativity meets insight about customers and psychology of them and identifying their needs and finding that really interesting. Increasingly with the technology that's transforming the way all of that takes place, and that was the sell. That's the sell I would make to someone today. Yes, and I don't feel like I've been missold.
That's a really good explanation of it, and you touched on there about brand as well, and certainly within your career, brand strategy is a real specialism for you. What excites you particularly about that area?
Yeah, I love exciting. I think that is a good word. I think if you're doing brand and marketing strategy, I do think it should be exciting. It certainly should be interesting and thrilling. I mean, it's increasingly it's scientific and systemic, and long may that continue. And it probably always was. I mean, people always talk about, when I first joined, there were people talking about how you don't know which half of your advertising is working. And I never understood that back in the year 2000 when I started, when every client I worked with had an econometric model. And now it's become really systematized, and we train all our marketers in all the right courses about audiences and targeting and positioning and brand tracking and the long and the short of it, and how you flow that through, and all of that stuff is true. But I think if you're doing it right, there should still be some of that, the excitement of the alchemy of making something out of nothing. Do you know what I mean? That value that is magically created. And I remember early on, there's nothing like FMCG to get a really good ringside seat into brand management. And early on, I had 4 years working with Wrigley, and when they were repositioning all of their chewing gum, and again, I'll never forget the magic of, you go to their factory, which is still down in Plymouth, and you're hoping it's going to be Willy Wonka, Johnny Depp, but of course it's not. It's all sort of hair nets, stainless steel, health and safety, but still you are faced with the reality of, it's this gum product that's created, and then it's cut into different shapes and flavored and packaged, but ultimately all of the value, all of the margin is created through brands. And again, with getting that ringside seats to Airwaves, you know that brand, where when I joined, they said, we've created it, and it's we're positioning it as a competitor to Tunes and Lockets in the medicated category. But as we arrived, they discovered that nobody was eating it for that. It was being eaten by people who just loved that strong flavour. It was such an intense kick of a product. It's for the smokers loved it, and the people whose palates were not necessarily, they weren't super tasters, and the people in the afternoon in an office who just wanted a pick me up after lunch to just get them going. And of course, that's a much bigger addressable audience. And when I joined Extra Chewing Gum, that was, we're both probably of an age we can remember. I remember the advertising where it was a dental product, Extra Gum. Do you remember there was an advert where it lowers the pH value in your mouth in between meals? You chew the gum, and there was a graph. You probably don't remember.
I don't recall that one, but you're right. We're definitely the same age, so I probably should remember it.
Well, I just remember just going, goodness gracious, graphs should never have a place in marketing. I'm not sure they should have a place in marketing communications. But of course, Extra became about fresh breath and the emotional confidence that comes with that. A vastly bigger audience, vastly more successful in the way it went out. So yeah, I think if you're doing it right, it's science, but it should be magical, and you should be excited by the alchemy of it.
And you talked at the beginning of that about the phenomenal change that we've seen over the last 10, 15, 20 years, etc. And certainly right now, I'd have to say in the last 12 months, my golly, there's been an enormous amount of change. And I hosted an event in London last Friday. I was discussing with a group of CMOs and CDOs about what are the priorities, and what do we think will be in store for 2024. So I'd be really interested on your view, doing the role you do, what do you think are some of the key priorities for senior marketing leaders at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's really there's so many little things we could pick up on, that are important about the future of personalization, or we could talk about AI, of course, because what sort of conversation we complete with that. But I think the thing they all ladder up for me is around complexity, and of course there's pace that's part of that. But I think what I find the biggest priority that I hear about a lot is it all ladders up to dealing with the unimagined complexity that even 10 years ago was not present, or 20 years ago was not present, and the complexity of the volume of things that marketing, due to it's a victim of its own success, has become able to influence and be a part of. Just the sheer new things that have been added on to the customer function rather than just marketing. And then even with all the touch points that marketing's always been responsible for, the level of complexity that's been introduced into those, and the level of discipline expertise that now has to be managed. And so I think the priority that is most challenging that I find is how to manage talent around that complexity. And I'm interested to see, I'm interested to see test you on this theory whether you think this is true. But I think I observe that back in the Wrigley days, back at the Willy Wonka factory, you had a marketing director who was this kind of Chinese dolls phenomenon, that you had, a generalist marketing director who was more experienced than the category manager, the assistant, that you had the brand managers for the different brands, and the assistant brand managers. But they all look like gradations of experience, and that was and their discipline expertise was vast, but across everything. Whereas now I look at my own heads of departments, and they are responsible for discipline expertise, but they're also running integrated projects for the customer and integrated campaigns. But I've got a head of who comes from a media background, but who's also running creative. Somebody who's coming from a digital background, where it's all their deep experience is around site, search, social, but now trying to, they're on the Mark Ritson course and trying to broaden their marketing experience. Somebody who's an expert, who's coming from a background in partnerships and sponsorships. And so I think that's a fascinating challenge that's now for leaders, certainly, but also just for the individuals who are the next generation who are going to go on to be leaders. They're not the same in they are really deep at discipline experts in one thing. And they're going to go on to become leaders of everything. And so it's somewhere in that synthesis of all these different disciplines that I think that's one of the most fascinating things that I'm facing into at the moment. Does that ring true for you as a recruiter?
Yeah, it's far more complex than it ever used to be, and you refer to it as the T-shaped profile, don't you, where you have a deep level of expertise in one area, but you also need to have this broad commercial breadth. And if I look at the briefs that we get now at that head of level, it is often a deep level of specialist expertise in a certain area, but that the candidates are also expected to have broad commercial skills, a stakeholder engagement, typically, brand creative. It really is quite challenging. It's certainly a lot more complex than it ever used to be. Good for search firms, because I suspect because of the complexity, there will be more work coming out for us to sort of help support with. But it's definitely not the classic marketing career. I mean, if you look back to your point 20 years ago, you could easily plot someone's marketing career. You would know pretty much what those steps are that they will go up to get to marketing director. Very different now. It's really, really different. And if you look at the teams as well, we cover that customer space, and intentionally we cover marketing, digital and tech, because the crossover in those areas is absolutely huge and becoming more so. And I think you'll see a real blend of skill mixes within those teams as well, and an expectation of people having at least that broad understanding across those areas. So interesting. It's certainly a very exciting time to be in marketing and to be supporting with the talent in marketing, that's for sure. But never a dull moment. And then in terms of advice, so I'm always interested to the answers on this, because you've been given oodles of advice over the years, but is there something specific that's either really stuck with you or you think would really benefit people who are starting out in their marketing careers?
Yeah, you're right. There's lots of advice in the industry, isn't it? And so it's hard to sort of, but I think when it all boils away, the advice that I'm still using, that's possibly, things I was told back then that I've carried through, might be, I still ask myself, someone said to me in the early days, just always ask yourself, are you enjoying what you're doing? Are you making the difference that you hope to? And I suppose you have to define what the difference is for you, but presumably you think you're succeeding and adding value. And are you learning at a pace that you find satisfying? And sure, that's a nice way of framing all that Daniel Pink autonomy mastery in a way that's slightly more natural, if you like. And I think that has been really, really valuable. And I do think that everybody should sort of ask themselves those questions. And I think it's led me to get to an understanding of the value of lateral experience. in your career, which I'm a big supporter of. And again, as working in recruitment, I was interested in your perspective of this, because then I had no energy experience before working in the energy sector or government experience. And in fact, my boss CEO had no energy experience either. There are eyebrows raised about that, a little bit. But of course, what you find so often is it's the difference between, it's the equivalence in recruitment, I think, of the long and the short of it, in the sense that if you have sector experience, in the short term, of course, you have a shorter learning curve, the vernacular, you kind of know where the metaphorical toilets are, if you like, on the challenges in front of you. But of course, that's good. It gets you going fast. But in the long-term view, I think if you have much more lateral experience, inevitably you've got a little bit more distance from things, and that I think is perhaps more valuable. So, for example, I mentioned the Einstein campaign. When we're developing that, of course, in government, there is a certain way of thinking about what does government communications look like. There is a certain expectation about that and how that is toned and what that exists. And so the idea of recreating him in 3D to bring back that's perhaps a challenging idea. But of course, whilst every sector is different and is unique, and every brand is unique, and that's true, the customer the audience is, and it's not the same literally, but the things that they respond to in the way that the things they want from brands, the customer experience they demand from brands, the way that they interact with marketing communications, those things are consistent. And I do think so that lateral experience, I think, is if you can try and not flitting around between everything, but if you can get really good stints, I do think that will serve you in good stead. Even if Suzie, your life is probably people going, must have financial services experience or must have this. I don't know if you do. I don't know if you agree about lateral experience.
I do on a personal level, 100%. Yeah. I mean, that's why we're skill set specialists rather than a sector specialist. So we do marketing, digital, and tech, but we do it across all sectors. And I've always believed that they're really transferable skills. And the majority of our clients would agree. You'll always get 20% who prefer to kind of select from their own sector, and there will always be specific roles where that makes more sense, clearly too. But generally speaking, we see a good amount of transferability between those sectors, and I think that's great. I think it gives you a different perspective, outside views, can enable you to add real value, bring real diversity of thought. So I think it's something we'll see more of going forward as well. I think the appreciation of diversity of thought is definitely on the increase. So fingers crossed. Let's hope it moves that way. And finally, Chris, what's next for your own career? We talked about the advice, but what about you? Where do you see your career going over the next few years?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because smart energy, obviously, it's a unique marketing challenge because I can only sell you, Suzie, one smart meter, and once you've got it, you're sold. And so, anybody listening to this, it's very interesting how once you're trying to do a one-time sale, and crucially, I've got to sell it to everybody. That no one really should be left behind, which is also quite unusual because most businesses are in a certain segment, or they're going after a certain target. So that's fascinating. But at the same time, by its very definition, it's finite life. Everybody will get one. So there will be a moment where I will have to do something else. So it's a very good, it's a question I'm very happy to face into, because it's like LOCOG. Do you remember the London Organising Committee of the Games? Eventually the Olympics happens and you've got to go somewhere else. So yeah, I guess I'll have to take my own advice around lateral experience. I'm not sure if there's any other sectors left. I didn't think there were, but I hadn't done government or energy, so there must be something. But I guess even if it's fascinating, there's so many really interesting challenges out there, even within energy, which I don't know, when you've been recruiting probably into energy in the last 10 years, it used to be quite not a particularly dynamic sector, very heavily regulated, not huge amounts of innovation, but obviously, I mean, the innovation it now leads the news. At the time of this recording, it's leading a lot of news around the government's sort of net zero strategy. So there's so many things even within energy that's exciting. After smart meters, your gas boiler, and being the decarbonisation of heating, heat pumps. an EV, the charging infrastructure, potentially you can see a future by which every home will have become a source of electricity generation in terms of solar panels, having a giant, you perhaps have a water cylinder, Suzie, but you're going to have a giant battery like that generates its own electricity. All the innovation of tariffs about time of use, so you pay for it and you pay less in the middle of the night than you do at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Suddenly the sector has exploded with things that where there are big marketing challenges for brands, British Gas, Octopus, you name it, and for the government and for every consumer to get their head around in the next 20 years. So I don't know, but I shall try and follow my own advice, but you'll have to pull me up if I'm not. You'll have to call me out on it.
Well, I'm sure there'll be many exciting things in store for you in the future. And I couldn't agree more. I think the energy sector is one of the most innovative sectors right now. So it's an interesting space to be part of. Chris, thank you so much. Fantastic answers to your questions, and I really, really appreciate you giving the time to join me today.
Thank you, Suzie. It's been brilliant. Lovely to chat.
Pleasure.